Welcome to today's webinar, and thank you to everyone for attending. Today we're going to talk about how to select your property manager and learn the questions they don't want you to ask. Just going to touch on the disclaimer quickly, won't go through this in detail. It's general in nature, does not constitute legal or financial advice, and we always encourage people to do their own independent research and form their own opinion. Your choice of real estate agency and property manager is critical to your success in property investment because they will be handling every aspect of the property for you and the tenancy from start to finish. Valuable time spent researching the market, finding the best property and negotiating the best value for money investment can quickly be eroded by choosing the wrong property manager. A quality property manager will maximise the returns, minimise the stress for you while maintaining the asset to its highest and best value. With an ever-changing market, many investors don't value the relationship they have with their property manager highly enough, with too many choosing the property manager mainly based on fees. It's because of this that I coined the expression, cheap property manager can end up being very expensive. Savvy property investors will tell you the right property manager can make or break your investment and can make you more money than you're trying to save. Selecting a property manager whose goals are aligned with your investment goals, consequently, is a very vital task and the easiest way to establish if a real estate agency is the right agent for you is to ask them the following questions. The objective of today's webinar is really to provide you guys with the tools, some advice, and educate you so you can make well-informed and strategic decisions about your investment future. We're going to cover on most commonly asked questions, provide you with answers to those questions, and really give you the information that a lot of property managers don't want you to know. So if you can hang around to the end of the webinar, we're going to give you a couple of bonuses and provide some really valuable content that you can take away today and implement in your investment portfolio today. An introduction to myself and what I'm passionate about. My name's Mark Shorrock. I'm the Managing Director and Principal Licensee of Bluestone Property Management. I've got 20 years of comprehensive hands-on industry experience. I'm a second-generation agent. My parents owned and operated 3 Alger Hooker offices on the Gold Coast for almost 40 years. I've successfully held every position in a real estate agency, from the front desk to the back desk, from the floor to the ceiling. I'm driven and genuinely passionate about helping people. I offer my staff and clients a unique balance of operational insights and expertise, tech savvy, and strong people skills. You guys are going to love this webinar, and when you stay till the end, I'm going to give you an opportunity to receive a comprehensive rental health check and a complimentary consultation from myself, a second-generation agent with over 20 years experience. For those people that also hang around all the way to the end, we've got an extra bonus for you today. It's a limited time offer where you're going to get a cheat sheet or all of my notes. So you can take notes through this webinar if you like, but for those of people who hang around till the end, we'll provide you with a cheat sheet which will provide you with all of the notes that you need to take, normally valued at $249, but for those people listening to the webinar today, it's absolutely free. Now, as promised, let's dive into the questions that most landlords don't ask and that some property managers don't want you to ask. Okay guys, the first question today is what skill sets are required to manage an investment property? I guess really the best way to put it is you need to be a jack of all trades. Organisational and time management skills are essential. There's so many things going on within the property, and at the one time, property managers are often dealing with portfolios of up to about 150 properties, and that could involve relationships with 150 odd tenants and 150 odd owners plus tradespeople. So they've got a lot of balls in the air and trying to juggle a lot of things at once, and some people have trouble with their own property or a couple of properties. Imagine scaling that up to 150 properties. So scheduling and multitasking also essential. Need for strong communication skills, verbal and written, is extremely valuable. Need to be, pretty good at negotiating as well, because we're often negotiating the best quote or a deal for owners. We need to be seen to be mitigating loss, keeping expenditure down. We don't want to be doing repair work for an owner if it's not needed, or spending too much money for them if we don't need to. These days, you might come as a surprise to some people, but tenants are often trying to negotiate a better deal on the rent and or the terms of the lease. In the old days, the advertised rent was the rent, and that's just what people paid. But nowadays, it's extremely common for tenants to come in at a lower figure. So, a good property manager needs to be able to negotiate those tenants up to the highest possible figure. In some cases, we manage to get above the advertised rent. The terms of the lease, the end date, you don't want a lease that's ending the day before Christmas, because the Christmas period is notoriously difficult to let a property out. And, leads us to our next thing, is the ability, which is similar to negotiating, is to mediate between parties to resolve issues, and create a suitable outcome, or the fairest possible outcome for all parties. If you can stay out of court, that's our advice, because typically it becomes costly, and in this day and age ends up in the tenant's favour. So marketing the property is obviously very important. Property manager needs to have the skills in marketing, copywriting, photography, those types of things. Minimise days on market and vacancy periods, and put more money in your back pocket in the way of rent. We need to have a good ability to research the local market, the data, things like vacancy rates, days on market, comparable rents, and then be able to report that back to the owner. Unfortunately, every now and then, it's not ideal, but we do have to become debt collectors when tenants fall behind in arrears, even with the best intentions, for situations outside of our control. Tenants who jump through all the hoops and meet the criteria on the front end have relationship breakdowns and lose their jobs, or to ill health or whatever reason fall behind in their rent. So we have processes to deal with that. Just a general property knowledge, and that's not about property in general, but they need to know the difference between houses and units and townhouses and so forth, but also an understanding for the local market and supply and demand. That leads into the next sort of property knowledge, which is maintenance. Property manager needs to be well versed in a broad spectrum of maintenance, not specialised in any one particular field. They need to be able to go through troubleshooting steps with your tenant, eliminate the need for a call-out fee, around about $80 to $100 for a plumber or electrician to go out to a property, only to find out that it was a problem that could have been troubleshooted. So, a good property manager can do that for you, and also have the ability to diagnose over the phone and then relay the work that's needed through to the tradesperson. Last but not least, I think in this day and age with cutting-edge technology, property managers need to be tech savvy. They also need to be a team player and very adaptable, but most of all resilient, because it's a tough industry and a tough job, often being pushed from pillar to post between owners and tenants, and negotiating and mediating and things like that. So resilience is definitely a skill set that's required to be a good property manager. On to our next question. Is it essential to appoint a property manager who is in the same suburb as your property investment? It's a good question, and one that we commonly asked. It used to be vital that your property manager was an expert within their particular field, and to do that they really needed to be within the suburb or the surrounding suburbs, so that they could keep abreast of the market conditions, recently rented properties, currently properties that are currently advertised for rent, supply and demand and so forth, which ultimately drives the price. But in this day and age, we've got access to cloud-based cutting-edge technology. Property managers have the ability to cover broad territories because they can work from anywhere. We provide our property managers with these cloud-based platforms, a modern laptop and smartphone. They have the ability to work from the office, on the road, or even on the kitchen bench of your property. Our next question is, does the agency have a dedicated property management department? For us, the short answer is yes. I personally think it's beneficial to choose a property manager based on if the agency's focus is property management, as opposed to generally sales has a higher profile, so it's the focus for most traditional agencies, most franchise groups, for instance. Not that there's anything wrong with the services that they provide, but property management in a lot of those offices, and I've worked in them, ends up being the poor cousin. You end up playing second fiddle. Whereas at Bluestone Property Management, hence the name, our focus is on property management. So I will touch on this really quickly. We have recently added "and sales" to the end of that, so that we found that we needed to do that so that we could help any of our investors that needed to sell, because we're in the best position to maximise the outcome for them. But we still have our primary focus within our business, which without a doubt is property management. I often ask people at barbecues, what is it about their property investment that annoys them, and it's overwhelmingly one of the main answers is communication, and more typically around that is that they get annoyed with having to speak to different people to try and get an answer, getting pushed from pillar to post. At Bluestone Property Management, you'll have a dedicated property manager, so you'll be speaking to the same person all the time, although any one of our team member can help you. It might take them a little bit more time to get an answer for you, but with our modern cutting-edge cloud-based technology, we record notes on file so anybody can help you. At the end of the day, you're paying similar fees, to employ a property manager from either a sales-focused business or a property management-focused business. So you may as well use a business that focuses on property management, where there's, staff are trained professionals and they are true specialists in their field. We'll move on to our next question, which is what are the advantages of having one point of contact or one person that will be looking after your property? Besides the obvious, the biggest advantage we see internally, plus also we hear externally from our investors, is that that their property manager pretty much at any given time knows exactly what's going on with the property. They know the tenants, they know the history to the property, and in particular, things that can't be documented or recorded, little things about how you like things done, your preferred method of communication, or maybe you have a particular note on file about how you like a certain process to be followed or completed. We find that this is better than task-based agencies, where you can end up dealing with any number of people within that pod, 2 or 3 different people that do different jobs, and quite often that can lead to staff shirking responsibility, not taking the blame and passing the buck onto other people. So we typically find that end-to-end property management, as we call it, where you've got one primary point of contact, is the best outcome for both parties. Our next question is, I think, particularly a good topic to talk about today, and a good question asked considering my involvement within Bluestone Property Management, and is that what are the benefits to the client when there is a director or an owner of the business or the property management agency involved into the day-to-day management of the department? I'm a second-generation agent with over 20 years of hands-on industry experience. There's not a job that I haven't done in real estate and in property management. I've successfully held every role from reception, leasing, maintenance, property manager, all the way through to running and operating the business. How this helps you is that Bluestone, this means that the staff feel supported and they can ask for advice without feeling overwhelmed. At any given stage, on any given day, any given week, I'm willing to roll my sleeves up and get my hands dirty. There's not a job that I still won't do. I'm quite often out there on the road, opening up properties for inspection, if needed, doing routine entry-exit condition reports. And my staff are particularly pleased. I think it gives me credibility, and it gives us a good reputation within the industry for being an agency that's willing to do anything to get the job done. The best way, we do this is by leading by example. And I get mutual respect from our staff, and likewise they get that in return. It's really about the culture of the business at the end of the day. If the staff feel appreciated and respected and they're paid well, we get low staff turnover, and this means for you low turnover of owners and a low turnover of tenants, and it's a win-win-win situation for all parties involved. Our next question today is why do you have someone that's got lots of experience in real estate to be managing the property for you? I guess with age comes experience, and no disrespect to younger people, but there's really no substitute for experience, I've found. Managing properties is so complex. Every property, every owner, every tenant, every office is different with staff, the dynamic is different, and every situation that arises is totally unique and different from the one before it. So a property manager with experience can draw on that, because the variables that are there and the possible outcomes are infinite. So if they can draw on that ability, that experience, that knowledge to try and expedite the process and negotiate or mediate a suitable outcome, it's better for everybody. A property manager with more experience and knowledge, they can draw on that to deal with most scenarios. Having said that, younger staff do bring a fresh approach and a new perspective, allowing businesses to evolve and keep up with the times, especially in this day and age when we've got cutting edge technology constantly being developed and put in front of us. We need the ability to be able to sort of bridge the gap, I guess, between the age and the experience and the youthful enthusiasm. Our next question today is, why is it important to have the stability and longevity with a property manager? Even with the advancements in technology that we just talked about, 100% of the history or the info never gets recorded, unfortunately. Even with the best intentions, systems, procedures, policies, in a industry where the saying goes, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen, things get missed. Being a property manager is a tough gig. Property managers are often pushed from pillars to post, mediating between parties, trying to create and negotiate fair outcomes. And the feedback we get from our owners is nobody likes the never-ending revolving door in some agencies where they're talking to a different person every couple of months and a different property manager. And it's inevitable when this happens that a certain amount of information isn't going to be recorded, it'll get lost. So with the stability and longevity of a property manager, it should ultimately maximise your returns and create a stress-free environment for you to be a property investor. Our fees are fair, but they're also sustainable, so we can afford to pay and incentivise our property managers to do the top job that they do for you. It ensures that they're here today, tomorrow, next week and next year to continue to continue managing your investment portfolio. The question that follows this one is, should you expect to receive a written proposal from your property manager? That's a good question, and the answer is yes and no. You would think that everybody would like to receive a proposal, but look, at the end of the day, most of the information I know from having spent 20 years in the industry, that most of this information is generic and specifically designed with, to manipulate the data to make the agency look good. Any property worth their salt can rent your property out, but a quality property manager will maximise your returns and minimise the stress involved in owning a rental property. At the end of the day, you put in a lot of faith in your property manager to take care of one of your most valuable assets, so you really need to be able to get along with that person, have a really good business relationship with them. What are some considerations when determining the geographical coverage of your property manager service is our next question. Most investors think it's better to have a property manager that specialises in one suburb, which is a good point, because without the advancements in technology, in the old days you had to work the suburb, you had to get to know all of the data, what was on the market for rent, what had recently rented, what the supply and demand was, the vacancy rates, all of those things. However, agencies like ours and Bluestones that have invested in cutting-edge technology can effectively manage properties over a much This is better for investors who own multiple properties because they can use their preferred agent to manage their whole portfolio. So investors at Bluestone can own investment properties on the north, south, east and west side of Brisbane, and we can manage their whole portfolio for them. One point of contact and one agency. Okay, our next question is, what are the risks when a property manager hands out the keys to tenants without attending the inspection? This is something that used to happen all of the time back in the old days. When I was young and growing up in my parents' office, I can remember being a young child, and I'd come home from school and sit on the front desk, and prospective tenants would come in and they'd hand over, I think, $50. In the early days, I think it was $20, but in the sort of mid-90s, it crept up to $50. And a copy of the driver's license, and you would write down their details and issue them with a receipt and give them a set of keys, and they'd go and show themselves through a property. But in this day and age, with everybody suing each other and insurance and things like that, getting over the top, security's become a big issue, understandably. I guess the biggest risk, some agencies still do this. You may find that hard to believe, but it is still a practice that happens. So definitely a good question if you're asking your property manager or interviewing them, ask them how they handle inspections. I wouldn't necessarily ask them if they hand keys out, but just ask them what their process is. And because if keys can be handed out and signed out, the problem with that is that naturally these people could go and no reference checks are done before people do these inspections. They can take the keys down to Bunnings now, get them cut, a couple of dollars each key, come back, hand the set of keys back in, get their security deposit back. They know the property's vacant, advertise a party on Facebook. Next thing you know, your property gets trashed and damaged. You're left with a cleaning and damage bill. You should be able to put that back on the agency, but unfortunately, in many cases, they may wash their hands of it. This would potentially void any insurance. No cause of break and entry typically voids most insurances. The other risk is for tenants. I'd be cautious as a tenant renting a property through an agency that hands keys out, because what's to say that someone who has inspected it and didn't apply for the property and get it approved didn't take a key and get it cut, and with the intention of coming back a couple of months after the property's tenanted, again they break in, no sign of forced entry, steal a bunch of stuff, and unfortunately the tenants may not even have a leg to stand on with their insurance company for a claim. Even worse than that would be someone getting access and squatting in the property. With possessions 9/10 of the law, it can be extremely hard to get a squatter out of a property. Our next question today, what is the property manager's process for showing a property to prospective tenants? It's a good question just to come after that previous one. Gives us a chance to touch on the process that we adopt here at Bluestone, and look, this is how it should be for most agencies. As I explained, I've been exposed to this industry for 41 years, and times have really changed. Back in those old days, we didn't have the ability to contact tenants that took the keys or that came through a property and inspected it and said that they liked it, and go back to them and get some feedback, quality feedback, which we could provide to the owner in relation to price and things like that. But the technology that we invest in and we provide for our staff here at Bluestone is a subscription to a somewhat automated inspection platform. It's called Inspect Real Estate, and what it does for us is it allows tenants to book inspections online through realestate.com and domain. And if there isn't a inspection schedule for that property, they have the ability to either book an inspection through the property manager's ideal week. So they may have it open in their calendar that they could show tenants through your property on Tuesday afternoons between 4 and 6, Thursday mornings between 8 and 10, and they may have an inspection booked for an open home on Saturday at 10 a.m. If those times aren't suitable for a tenant, they can request an inspection outside of those times. And in an agency like ours, we are notified of that, and where we can, we accommodate the tenant's requests and we tee up a suitable time. The platform also allows us to push notifications to these tenants of reductions in price, cancelled inspections, and or if other similar properties are listed on the market. How many days a week should the property manager have staff available to show your property? That's the next question. It ties into the one beforehand. We have staff available here at Bluestone 6 days a week. Not all agencies, you may be surprised again to hear this, not all agencies open their properties for inspection on a Saturday. However, we find with tenants being so busy, sort of work-life balance is tipped out a little bit. To make our properties available 6 days a week gives them the best chance of renting and minimises your days on market and your vacancy period, ultimately putting more money in your back pocket. If possible, like I said in the previous question, we try and accommodate tenants' requests, from anywhere from about 7 or 8 in the morning through till about 6 p.m. at night. We are conscious of our property managers' security though, so we always ensure that we get tenants' names, phone numbers and contact details before showing them through your property, just in case they do come in, leave a window open and come back through and cause some damage or have a party. We can provide the police with a detailed list of the people who have registered for inspections and come through your property. Our next question today, very, very good question, and one we're asked frequently. Again, if you're not asking this question, when you're interviewing your property manager, you should be. Should I be concerned at how many properties the property manager looks after? The short answer is yes, but look, ultimately it really depends on a number of factors, like the whether the property management department is the primary focus of the business, like it is ours here at Bluestone, or is their secondary focus, and the agency's core focus is on sales. That office structure, and by that I mean support from management all the way down to admin. So property managers have a lot of backup. They can get assistance from other property managers. They have assistance from leasing departments, administration support, plus also support from management and ownership of the business, like we have here at Bluestone with myself. Like the difference between old technology and the new technology is the cloud-based platforms give a property manager the ability to manage more properties effectively. Back in the old days, or any agencies that are still around using old methods and old platforms, server-based CRMs, paper reporting as opposed to our digital reporting, can't manage as many properties. It's just more labour intensive. Another contributing factor is the management style. By that I mean there are two core types of property management structures or styles. One is portfolio based, or what we call end-to-end property management. So you've got one point of contact that primarily takes care of every aspect from top to tail, start to finish of your investment property. The other one is a pod system where those tasks are broken up typically between 3 people. So you might have one person dealing with certain aspects in relation to an office-based role. Someone else might be out on the road, and someone else may be a blend of in between. But you could need to speak to any number of those 3 people to get an answer to more than one question. On the end-to-end, with cutting-edge technology, we see experienced property managers managing anywhere between about 120 and 150 properties. On the pod system, with 2 to 3 staff, again, depending on the technologies, they can manage anywhere between 300 and about 450 properties. So in the ideal world, you'd have an experienced property manager that's got a good couple of years under their belt, because again, you pay the same fee typically regardless of whether you've got someone who's been in the industry for 5 minutes, fresh out of high school, or someone who's been in the industry for 10 years with an abundance of experience to draw on. So here at Bluestone, we ultimately aim to give our property managers all of the technology, all the mod cons, and a portfolio's ranging from between 120 and 150 properties, and that is primarily based at the end of the day on the geographical spread of those properties. So as you can see, there are many variables that determine the answer to that question. I guess the real question is that you could ask, if we derive all of that, if we put all of that into the pot and boil it down, at the end of the day, you need to know what the staff to property ratio is for the business. Now, in a business like Bluestone's, where I'm the managing director and the principal licensee and the owner of the business that's actively involved in the day-to-day operations, you can count myself into that ratio. We've got a senior property manager and currently 2 other property managers, so totaling 3 property managers and an administration person who's offering support. In addition to that, we've recently employed an experienced sales manager with 17 years experience, giving us a combined experience of 79 years, which is considerably, when we look at that, that's considerably more than what you see in most agencies. Now, our ratio with those, what have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 staff with our current portfolio gives us a ratio of 1:58. So we've got 1 staff member essentially to 58 properties. Now, this is considerably less than the industry standard. So the 2 questions to ask is, how many properties will my property manager be looking after? And what is your staff to property ratio? Because you may find in some agencies that property manager has little to no support from management or administration, so they will be basically working on a 1 to 150 ratio, as opposed to ours, which is almost a third of that, as 1:58. The following question is another really good question. This is ultimately determines the outcome of the lease period and your investment success, and that is, how should a property manager screen prospective tenants with regards to credit worthiness, past rental history, and their current employment? Here at Bluestone, we've developed a suitable tenant policy, or what we would call a pre-approved tenant policy. So by that I mean is, if a tenant can jump through all of the following hoops, we will pre-approve them for your final approval. There are a couple of cases where we've got a number of our property investors that have been with us for either 4 or 5 years, or we manage a number of properties for them and we have a good track record of results with them, where they have sort of relinquished that responsibility to us to, I guess, based on past experience, they're happy to let us make the final approval on that. But look, we are more than happy to give the final approval to you as the owner of the property. It is actually our preferred option. But like I said, some of our investors are just too busy and have total faith in our ability to do a good job for them. So the things that we look for when we're processing a application is that they're not listed on any tenancy database. So they're not blacklisted as a tenant by another agency for either causing malicious damage or leaving owing a massive amount of rental arrears. We need at least 1 applicant over 18 years of age. We income test them to the prescribed method, which is that the combined weekly rent is not exceeding more than 30% of the net weekly income. We prefer consistent employment for previous 12 months. However, we realise there are circumstances outside of the tenant's control. For this, people moving from interstate or overseas, in which case we look at their employment history. We need to ensure that the tenants meet body corporate bylaws, and that's in particular to pets. Some tenants may, we're seeing more and more tenants now having pets. It's definitely something for every investor to consider if they are open to that option. Again, this should raise another question, which we aren't going to cover today, but we will do so in another webinar down the track. And that's that you can bump the rent up for having pets in a property. Ultimately, if it's managed well, it can yield you a higher income. We won't get off track here, though. The next point that we look for is not exceeding the number of occupants on the management agreement or recommended under the Queensland Fire Safety legislation. that can be overwritten by any particular owner who may say, look, I don't want any more than, let's say, 2 adults in a property and or any sort of number of children. We do need to be mindful of discrimination though. The next point is living arrangements, for previous 2 years declared. So we're looking for previous rental history. Again, not everyone has rented a property, so if they're a previous homeowner, we'll try and speak to their agent. We'll jump online and check out the presentation of their property in their online advertisement for the sale of that property. And where possible, get some inside information on the background and the history. We're typically looking for a good rental history, which is our next point, with no sort of marks or blemishes on their record. No more than 2 notices to remedy breach issued within the 12-month period due to rental arrears. No notices to leave due to any unremedied breaches or any other serious breaches, objectionable behaviour, noise, or any significant damage to the property. We require tenants to apply for our properties to inspect the property or have someone inspect the property on their behalf. Again, situations prevail outside of our control here where there are instances where tenants just physically can't inspect a property, in which case we put a special condition into the lease for you to protect yourselves and ourselves, which is a sight unseen special condition, where the tenant acknowledges that they've taken on the property without having physically inspected it. We'll naturally provide them with photos and a very detailed description online, floor plans where possible. But the main thing is there that we're protecting you as the owner of the property from any fallback. There are instances, I know of stories when, many stories, I have too many to give you any particular situation, but in general, tenants have been put into property without inspecting them, and these special conditions haven't been added, and they have successfully been able to get out of the property within a couple of days or weeks of moving in because they have been able to take their concerns that the property wasn't as represented in the photos or the ad successfully to the Small Claims Tribunal, or QCAT as we call it up here in Queensland, and be let out of the lease. We typically look for lease terms greater than 6 months. The ideal period is 12 months. However, a tenant may either choose 6 months as their preferred option. The other side of that is that our recommendation may be to you as the owner to consider longer than a 6-month lease, because we may not have a lot of options to choose from in applicants, and the only people that apply for your property may not be the ideal tenant. They're good and they meet most of the the requirements that I've mentioned beforehand, but there may be a couple of little question marks over some of the things. We may not be able to access employment history. They may not have a rental history, and have a classical example would be someone who's moved out of home, never rented before, hasn't owned a property, and we put them in. We may test them out for you at 6 months, and then if they do well over those 6 months, then obviously we'll offer them a new lease. Whilst we're on this point, I think it's worthwhile mentioning that we typically will try and align lease end dates to finish in peak season where you've got supply and demand in your favour. So, I touched on that before, where we, don't want to lease ending the day before Christmas. So in which case there we may run a 13 or 14 month lease and have the lease end date finish in January, February, which is the peak time to maximise your income and yield. Next question, guys, is should my property manager be willing to go to court for me? And does their success rate for previous appearances matter? Yes, they definitely should be prepared to go for you. But so look, it's worthwhile noting that it is outside the scope of works for a property manager as per the agreement. And that's definitely here in Queensland anyway. The states, it does vary from state to state. Typically, you'll see a fee like ours around about $88 per hour to represent you, and you'd normally be looking at 3 or 4 hours. But our preferred option is that we mediate a suitable outcome for all parties without going to court, and I'll touch on that reason in a minute. But the success rate does matter because every case is different with so many different variables, different owners, tenants, properties, property managers. Ultimately, it comes down to the agencies and the property managers' record keeping. Like I said before, the saying goes in property management, if it wasn't recorded, it didn't happen. And, you really need to plan for the hearing. So a fair bit of time needs to go into building a case. Now, the reason I sort of put such a large emphasis on that is that gone are the days when legislation was heavily in favour of landlords or the owners of the property. I can remember, when I was a kid growing up in my parents' agency, I used to go to the office after school and help answer the phone and different things like that, pull the signs apart. But back 20, 30 years ago, the legislation and the rules and courts, everything was so heavily in favour of owners of property, tenants almost had no rights. In the modern era, we are seeing the pendulum has swung past what would be deemed fair and reasonable for most people to being somewhat heavily weighted in favour of the tenant. So ultimately, you're best to try and mediate a suitable and fair outcome for all parties outside the court because adjudicators are lenient towards tenants. So not only will you typically be ruled in favour of the tenant if you don't have records and, haven't a property manager who's been able to plan a thorough case and build a good case as the backbone, then the adjudicator will rule against you and, typically in favour of the tenant, which will cost you money, and then you'll also pay for the property manager's time to represent you. So it's often cheaper to settle out of court with a mediation. This is a better outcome, saves you money, saves you more money than you're trying to make. Our next question today is another good one, which we asked quite commonly, not the most common asked question, but it is something that we're asked often, and that's what strategies does a property manager use to attract the best tenants? I think the best one is quality marketing. That really starts with professional photos. There's the standard or the bar many, many years ago, it was only for sale properties that engaged professional photographers to take photos, but we're in such a competitive space nowadays that we highly recommend you invest in professional photos. The current cost is about $121, including GST, for about 8 photos, which is typically more than enough. Now, that's a very small investment. Considering on our average rental of $417 per week, that can easily be retrieved by renting the property out only a couple of days earlier. Good copywriting is the next thing. A property manager, as I mentioned in the tasks or their abilities earlier on in the piece with those questions, one of the skill sets a good property manager needs to have is good copywriting skills. So a heading that is targeted at your target demographic of tenant, and also good descriptive text, which gives the tenants, a good insight into the property and encourages them to come and inspect it. Presentation is the next thing. Tenants are looking for well-presented properties that are clean and well-maintained, and they should be cleaned, by the previous tenant is the ideal scenario. But my point here really is more about the maintenance of a property. If your property is available and it doesn't look very well maintained, then tenants obviously aren't going to have a lot of confidence in that you're going to continue to maintain that property, and they will just go and apply for another property where it's been really well maintained to the highest possible standard. They'll be confident then if anything breaks during that tenancy that you'll get it fixed. The last thing is the professional customer service offered by agencies like our own. Here at Bluestone, we believe in treating tenants with the mutual respect and dignity they deserve, and we get that reciprocated from those tenants. We often find that tenants with Bluestone stay on for much longer than the industry average, and what that translates to you is that a higher occupancy and a higher yield and more money in your back pocket at the end of the day. This is the next question's one. Look, it's not commonly asked, but I've thrown this one in there because I think it's while it's not a question we get asked all the time, it is something which is the focus of most investors and worthwhile us talking about here today. And that, how does the property manager manage all the financial aspects of the property investment? Now, we're talking about things like rent collection, rent arrears, when your tenants fall behind and are owing rent, recovery of water charges, which we call tenant invoicing. So we get your Queensland Urban Utilities water bill and pass the usage cost on to the tenants and invoice them for that. They have 30 days to pay that, which is quite often outside the date that the bill is due, so we need to manage that process. Payment of rates, urban utilities and body corporate fees is typically involved in most of the fee structures for agencies. So, you're paying for that service. You'd be crazy not to get your property manager to do it for you, with the added benefit that those payments end up on your end of financial year statement. And, for trust accounting, that means that all of your in and outgoings are in one place on that end of financial year statement. That's not only easier, but cheaper for you to have your accountant do your tax. We pay all the maintenance invoices for you, and we look at preventative maintenance and forecasting. It's a new initiative here that's been designed by our team. It's something we're currently working on is a maintenance forecast or an expenditure forecast. We can map out the next 12 months and on a calendar and plot that in there for you when you can expect your rates, water bills, body corporate fees, all of those types of things. The next question is, how does the property manager keep you informed on movements in the local property market? Just a quick one here. At Bluestone, we provide regular newsletters containing market updates. Now, lots of agencies do newsletters, but unfortunately they put a lot of rubbish in there. We find that if we're going to take the time and effort to put these things together, that we really listen to the feedback. We often survey our owners and ask them what it is they'd like to see. Typically what we're finding out is the two topics which most requested are legislation updates, things like, say, Pool Fencing Acts, Divided Fences Act, and the next one was market updates in relation to data. So the data is so widely accessible nowadays. The problem is that anyone can get their hands on the data, but the problem we find is deciphering that data. So when we're so close to it, we've got our finger on the pulse, we have the ability to just decipher that data and sort of, take what is a lot of noise and a huge amount of information and sort of boil it down to make it so that it's specific to you in the capital city, being Brisbane, and or the region, north or south, that you live in. The other part of that answer to that question is that at Bluestone we conduct rental reviews on lease renewals. So when your lease comes up for renewal, we don't just sort of make a suggestion that it should be renewed at the current rate. We will look at doing some research for you and provide you with a quick report, which we look for comparable properties, the same amount of bedrooms, bathrooms, car accommodation, of the same age on a same size block or within the same size unit complex that have rented within the last 6 months. And it's, justification around keeping the rent the same or with the ideal prospect of making a small rental increase. Only $10 a year. $10 a week might not seem like much, but it's an extra $520 a year. Next question, guys. How regularly should your property manager inspect your property and check on the tenants? Another good question. It's a quality question and one we get asked quite often. The general rule of thumb is between 3 and 4 times a year. It's the maximum 4 times a year for a routine inspection due to Queensland legislation. Now, look, our internal policy is, depending on the quality and the history of the tenants, is to inspect the property within 3 months of them moving in. So, we put a tenant into a property, they meet our suitable tenant or pre-approved tenancy policy, and they jump through all the hoops there, put ticks in all the right boxes, but we do want to make sure for ourselves that they are keeping the property clean and well maintained. So we'll endeavour to inspect that property within 3 months of the start of the tenancy. Now, we do inspect every 17 weeks thereafter, which is 3 times a year, leaving a 4th inspection for the owner to come through the property, because that's another conversation we could talk about for minutes on end. But the other option there is that to look at is after tenants have been in the property for a couple of years and they have a history of taking care of the property, keeping it clean and well maintained, we give owners the option of dropping them back to a biannual inspection or 2 inspections per annum. Now, the reason behind this is that we can give the tenants the quiet enjoyment of the property. As I'm sure you can appreciate, if we've got tenants that have been in the property for 2 or 3 years, it's immaculately presented, they're easy to deal with. They attend to some small things themselves, maybe like replacing light bulbs, things that they may be able to, pass on the cost for to the owner. We will make an educated decision or recommendation to you as the owner. Ultimately, it's in your hand that, these tenants can, as a sign of respect to them, which they appreciate, by staying in a property often for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, is just give them a little bit more breathing space without them feeling like we're constantly checking over their shoulder and checking on what they're doing. We generally find that this results in a higher occupancy, low vacancy, and the result of more money in your pocket. The next question is, how should your property manager handle situations such as tenants missing rental payments and after hours emergencies? I'll touch on the arrears first. At Bluestone, our cloud-based CRM has an automated arrears notification. So what that means is that the tenant and the property manager are notified once the tenant gets 4 days into arrears. Now, why that's 4 days is it can, as I'm sure you can appreciate, tenants may pay their rent a day late, or they put their rent in on a Friday but it doesn't clear until a Monday. So we allow that little period there. Tenants don't want to be getting a reminder notice when they've actually paid their rent but it just hasn't cleared yet. It leaves a little bit of a bad taste in their mouth and may make the difference between them renewing their lease after 6 or 12 months and moving out and you having a small vacancy period. It's ultimately going to cost you a lot more money than us chasing the rent when they're only a couple of days in the hole. Now, this system is set up to notify the tenants through a series of text messages and emails, and also prompts the property manager to give them a call. Regardless of the situation, tenants have lost their job or there's been a separation or something like that, it's industry best practice and comply with regulation to protect yourself as the owner, as us as the agents, to issue them with a notice to remedy breach after 8 days, giving them 7 days to rectify that breach. If they don't, then we issue a notice to vacate the property and make an application to QCAT and also claim the bond. Good property managers understand that everyone, even quality tenants that have jumped through all of the hoops on the front end and put ticks in all the right boxes, sometimes have trouble paying their rent in circumstances outside of their control and our control. So that's the biggest thing there, is sort of managing those relationships with the tenants, having clear lines of communications. But I think the last thing there is probably the most important thing, is that here at Bluestone and any agency really should bring all arrears to your attention at 4 days plus, keeping you in the loop, because ultimately the decision is yours as the owner of the property, whether you do decide to instruct us to issue those tenants or your tenants with a notice to remedy breach. Emergency repairs. Bluestone's new tenants are provided with an entry, excuse me, like a new induction procedure, which also is available on our website. And this basically covers what is and isn't an emergency repair under legislation, what to do, who to call, backup emergency service contact numbers like the police and things like that. Our preferred tradespeople are well versed in identifying what is an emergency repair and troubleshooting, and our tradespeople and ourselves are very quick to point out to tenants that if we call after the troubleshooting process, we call a tradesperson out to a property and they deem repair not to be an emergency, that it will be a cost that will have to be picked up by the tenant of the property and not the owner. Our next question is, what knowledge should a property manager be able to demonstrate about the local market? I think the main things here to touch on are vacancy rates, the days on market, so that's how long a property has been advertised. Now, we can advertise properties generally about 4 weeks, a month before the tenant moves out. A bigger question is really the vacancy rate over the days on market, because what's affecting your back pocket is empty property, and if the property is empty, there's no rent coming in, you're not making any money, we're not making any money, so we're very conscious of that. Median rental prices for the different types of properties in your suburb, houses, units, townhouses. Ultimately, supply and demand dictates the price, so we need to have a really good understanding of supply and demand. And last but not least, local infrastructure and amenities. Schools, school catchments, transports, proximity to shops, all of those things which, if provided to tenants, make the difference between them being able to make an educated decision to apply for the property and not. Next question. How familiar is your property manager with current and relevant legislation? It's an extremely complex and somewhat ambiguous industry. The legislation, I guess, can be perceived in many ways and often is misinterpreted even by professionals like ourselves and the adjudicators in the courts. We unfortunately often hear about within the industry people taking different perspective to interpretations of rules and regulations within the Act. As a result of this, even ourselves, as 79 years experience, we subscribe to an independent best practice legislation advisor, someone that we can go to and ask questions. Whilst this comes at an expense, we believe it's saving the company and our owners a lot of money in the long run. In addition to that, we invest quite heavily into out-of-office training, in particular with this particular industry best practice advisor, and also regularly undertake internal training to keep our staff up to date with the current legislation and yours or our legal requirements under the Act. Given the industry is so complex and I've had such a long experience and exposure to it directly for 20 years and indirectly for almost 40 years, knowing what I know about real estate and the risks that are involved, you'd have to have rocks in your head to try and manage your properties these days yourself. It's fraught with danger. The legislation is extremely complex and convoluted. And, I'd be worried and concerned and afraid at the end of the day that someone would come along and potentially sue me for everything I've got. And, if you miss something like a smoke alarm compliance inspection and the property happens to burn to the ground and, worst case scenario would be the death of a tenant, then potentially you could end up in jail. So, our recommendation is to employ an experienced property manager or a property management team or agency that are well versed in the legislation and the Act at meeting not only their requirements but also yours as the owner of the property. Sort of leads us into our next question, which is what level of support does your property manager have within their office? Touched on this before, just go over it again quite quickly for you guys. We're a little bit unique in being a property management specific office. Myself, I'm the managing director, but very hands-on, still actively involved in the everyday operations of the business. Not a job I won't do. Even regularly find me on a Friday afternoon helping out with the cleaning of the office. We've got a senior property manager with over 10 years experience and 2 designated property managers underneath that person within our team, and an experienced administration person who offers full-time support. And just reiterating or recapping on that, we've got a sales manager with over 17 years experience. So in our office, we've got a really good culture, a very good team environment. It's extremely collaborative. The culture's genuine in that it's teamwork orientated. I'd go as far to say that anyone would be more than willing to bend over backwards to help their colleagues. The benefit is, to you as the owner or investor, our client, that while you have one primary point of contact, you can contact our team, and generally speaking, anybody will be able to help you. Like I said before, it might take a little bit more time to get an answer to you, but we can guarantee we will get back to you. So teamwork would be the one way that I'd sum up the support within our office. The next question is, how often would or should a property manager communicate with their landlords? Now, this is arguably one of the most contentious issues why owners, investors change agencies, property managers, and that's because they're unhappy with the level of communication that they're receiving from their current agent. So it's imperative that an agency's put communication sort of at the top of their list of priorities to keep owners and investors happy. Now, it is worthwhile pointing out that every owner is different, and they have varying degrees of communication that they like to be kept up to date with. We have some owners who have been with us for 5 years. We manage multiple properties for them, and through our track record, they're confident that we can get the job done, and they only like to be contacted in extreme circumstances when there's emergencies, or if, for instance, their tenant falls behind in their rent and they fall into arrears. Other than that, they're entirely happy for us to manage the whole process for them, which is ultimately what they're paying for us to do. We do have other owners that like to be spoken to and communicated with more regularly, even at sometimes when their property is vacant and available for rent, and they don't have any money coming in, then we will speak to some owners every day, and in some instances multiple times a day throughout that short vacancy period. So that really depends on the person, the client, and also I think that changes over time depending as they build up their trust with us as a business. The next question today is, why is landlord insurance critical for my property? Another thing is this is not typically a question we get asked, but probably more so a factor which is often overlooked by property investors and agencies alike. We're quite proactive in our approach here at Bluestone Property Management, where we are always looking for ways to mitigate loss for our owners and minimise the risk. And probably one of the best ways you can do this is through a small tax-deductible investment into specific landlord insurance. I'll take the opportunity to mention that, there are a couple of companies that specialise in this. They do charge around about $300, $350 a year. That is tax deductible, as I said. They specialise in landlord protection insurance. We are aware there are a number of other insurance providers and banks that offer varying degrees of landlord protection insurance, but be very careful. We can speak from volumes of experience that these policies can differ greatly in relation to what they will and won't cover you for, and we often see the insurance companies getting out of having to make payments on claims due to technicalities within the fine print. A classical example of that is that if your tenant is on a periodic lease and the agency has failed to notify the insurance company, which I could almost guarantee rarely happens, and the tenant absconded and left owing rent, then you would have no claim for loss of rent. Now, while contents insurance is not compulsory, because that's the responsibility of the tenants, but you can't, as an owner of the property, force a tenant to take out that insurance. You would need to be responsible to take out building insurance, which covers you for building replacement if the property burns down. If you buy a unit, the body corporate strata levies will include this building insurance. Now, based on our extensive experience, we highly recommend that all of our investors, and we don't use this word lightly, highly recommend, take out landlord protection insurance against things like tenant damage or malicious damage to a property, or they leave without cleaning or paying rent. And we do find that the two basic the primary differences between the insurance policies are some are more particular in covering damage and cleaning as opposed to others which cover rent. So there are strategies that we adopt here around identifying the different types of insurance that the owner has, and then adopting a strategy around claiming what monies we can from a tenant. For instance, if your policy would cover you for rent and not for cleaning and damage, and the tenant was willing to pay some money, then we would attribute that money towards rent and not cleaning and damage. And obviously, if it was the other way around, it would be vice versa. The most valuable asset you have, though, is your ability to earn an income. So make sure you have adequate income protection insurance, because you're relying on that part of your salary to cover expenses and mortgage repayments. I could tell numerous stories firsthand from where we have had tenants jump through all the hoops and tick all the boxes for our tenant pre-approval or selection process. For all intensive purposes, these people appear to be great. A couple of children. They go through a relationship breakdown and the wheels fall off, and we end up with domestic violence and malicious damage to properties and loss of ability to pay rent. And unfortunately, even though we have done everything we can as an agent to protect the owners, circumstances far outside of our control, extenuating in the instance that we are left in a precarious position where the owners recover, their ability to recover the cost to cover the cleaning and damage and loss of rent is limited, especially if the agency has failed to document the process of the breakdown, I guess, in that relationship with the tenants. Okay, folks, second last question, almost there. Can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Just about got your hands on that bonus that we're offering at the end of this. Why should you select a property manager? Why shouldn't you, should I say? Why shouldn't you select a property manager based on their fee structure alone? Look, typically we see the difference in fees being as little as around about $5 a week, give or take. Now, I don't know about you guys, but for me, property investment is typically one of, if not the most valuable asset a lot of people own. I can understand people skimping on costs maybe for everyday items, but not for $5 a week for something that could be potentially worth, on average, around about $500,000. To me, it just doesn't make sense, knowing what I know with my 20 plus years experience in the industry. You need to invest in a property manager who has the credentials to get the job done and maximise your investment opportunity, maximise your returns, and minimise the stress. Remember, a cheap property manager can end up being very expensive. I'll give you a couple of really quick examples. I won't go on about this because I'll do an entirely separate webinar on this item or this particular topic. Could talk for 20-30 minutes about this and provide a bunch of case studies, but just touch on it in today's Q&A. For example, poor tenant selection can end up in high turnover of tenants and extended vacancy periods. And when the property's vacant, you're not earning an income, we're not earning an income. Not ideal for either of us. If your property's rented below the median rent for the area, the median may be $500 a week, and you're renting the property out at $490, $10 a week, 52 weeks of the year, there's $520. That's on average around about a third of our fees. If we can get you an extra couple of dollars a week over and above what the cheaper competition can get you, we're going to be making you more money than you're saving. Part of that poor tenant selection, tenants who, with all the best intentions, like I said, they meet our stringent screening process, but the wheels fall off and we end up with a domestic violence issue, and they cause damage to the property, leave cleaning, leave the property owing rent, don't have insurance, you're out of pocket potentially more than an entire year's of property management fees. How much money are you saving if you choose a cheap agent or a discount provider that doesn't make the recommendation that you need to take out landlord protection insurance? Just to recap, cheap agents can end up being very expensive. if you shop for a property manager on fees alone, you might end up spending more money than you're trying to save. Like your last question, what can I do if I want to change managing agents? Relatively simple. If the property is vacant, you should be able to change with little to no notice at all. You would be required to put that notice in writing to the other agent, and your next agent, hopefully Bluestone, can come along and collect the file and the keys and get the property on the market and rented for you straight away. If the property is tenanted, however, under the legislation, you are required to give 30 days notice. It's as easy as signing a form, which we can provide to you either electronically through DocuSign. It's a quick tick and a flick. And we do all the dirty work and heavy lifting for you by contacting the other agent and making arrangements to pick up the keys 30 days or sooner through mutual agreement and the file, and we take over the management of the property. A very, very easy process, and one that we can easily talk you through if that's something that you're considering after today. All right, then that's the end of our Q&A session. So I just wanted to thank everyone for their valuable time today. We hope you can appreciate the value of the content that we have provided you with. You know, this is some tools and tips and tricks that have helped you hopefully educate you. You can make these well-informed and strategic decisions about your property investment future. You've learnt the answers to the questions some property managers don't want you to ask. And, it's your ultimately, you've got to have to ask yourself this question. Is your investment property working for you, or are you working for it? If you're working for your investment property, then would you like our help? Alrighty, we've got our limited offer here today for our webinar guests, and it's a without sugarcoating or scaremongering the truth, an exclusive opportunity for you to leverage off my experience, 20 plus years directly, 40 years indirectly as a second generation agent, and the knowledge that I've gained, and pass it on to you by receiving a free rental health check and complimentary consultation. It comes absolutely free and without obligation, no hard sell. In that rental health check, you will receive the following. I'll do a rental review for you personally, check if you are getting the highest possible rent in today's market. I'll do a tenancy review for you, check if your agent has you protected under the law. I'll check your tenant by screening them just to make sure that they aren't on any blacklists or anything like that. Unfortunately, that is one thing that some agencies don't do. Check your latest routine inspection report just to check that it's thorough, detailed, and includes quality photos. A landlord insurance review. This is an investment towards covering situations outside of our control and tax deductible. An agency review. Check if your agent is saving you money by passing on all possible costs to your tenant. Lucky last, a management agent review. Check if your agent is overcharging you. Okay, everyone, we're just about at the end of the webinar now, and those people who've been patient and sat through and listened to all of our questions and answers, we appreciate your patience. You'll be sent a link in an email after this, which will provide you with access to our cheat sheet. It'll give you, sort of the answers to the questions. I've gone through them. If you didn't take notes, don't worry. Normally valued at $249, but for you today, as a limited time offer, absolutely free, obligation free. If you'd like the health check, which we highly recommend, naturally we dive into a lot more detail there for you and cover all of those topics that I just went over. It is without scaremongering or sugarcoating the truth. We'll provide you with a detailed report. You need to click on the link that's provided in this page and fill out the registration details on there, and I'll be in touch with you as quickly as possible within a couple of business hours, initially to touch base with you, and then get back to you typically within around about 24 business hours with a detailed report. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask by emailing me directly, or visit us at bluestonepm.com.au. Just in finishing up today, a little quote that I came up with was, property management is a fine balancing act. So if things aren't stacking up with your property manager, then give Bluestone Property Management a call. All right, guys, hooroo. That's it for me today. Don't forget to ask any questions or let us know if you've got any particular topics you'd like us to cover in our next webinar. We can put another series of questions together or do a more in-depth look at anything in particular. Maybe there's something on that list today that we didn't cover that's particularly important to you. So like I said, make a comment in the below there, or send us an email, or reach out to us through our website, or give me a call. Until next time, catch you later.